And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roger, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal. Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. Off. It's orange!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
Look at this!
Put that in the big bag, Jingle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If there's methane, would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You bet. We don't need any more of these.
Yikes, you bet, concur. It's time for another episode of NASA Spaceflight Live, and this week we have a very special one. I'm Jack Byer, your host for today, and of course you can see Adrian Byle over. Oh, wrong. Well, I can see Adrian Byle over there, also joining us as an expert on today's stream. But forget us. Today we are joined by the man, the myth, the legend. Can I say that, Mr. Ashlee Vance? Ashlee, thank you so much for joining us on this one.
Thank you guys for having me. I like the sweet intro. I'll take it.
Oh, I'm all amped up. Every time the NSF live intro rolls, I could just get that shot of adrenaline. So, y'all, if you don't know, you should know, but if you don't know who Ashlee Vance is, he has written a number of excellent books. Of course, the first one that we are going to talk about for, purposes here is Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the Quest for a Fantastic Future. And that is, of course, fantastic. But recently, in fact, this year, what was it, like, I want to say May or somewhere?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. We came out with, or you came out with When the Heavens Went on Sale, which, first off, awesome title. And second off, awesome cover. Just absolutely fantastic. And so, chat, if you have any questions for Mr. Vance, that's too formal. If you have any questions for Ashlee, be sure to tag at NASASpaceflight in chat and ask away. We have a bunch of good questions here from our members. But yeah, Ashlee, do you want to just sort of give the viewers a quick, elevator pitch sort of thing of When the Heavens Went on Sale? I mean, I have so many questions too, but please go.
Yeah. I mean, it's starts off with SpaceX, but it's really not the billionaires, which is usually what people think. This is more like the underbelly of new space, and it's almost like 4 separate books in some ways. It's Planet Labs, Rocket Lab, Firefly, and Astra, and just like the title tries to capture. I felt like this was the moment in time when we'd finally moved away from governments being in control of space, and the capitalists had come in, and I wanted to capture that moment and give people a feel for what this looks like. It was, as I was doing all my reporting, going around the world, it's clear to me that new space does not look like old space, and I didn't think most people sort of really knew what this world looked like. So I wanted to be kind of fly on the wall and super quick. I mean, it's not, I mean, I guess on some level it's like a business book because it's talking about the business of space, but it's meant to just be, a narrative, like getting into these characters and telling the story in a fun way.
Yeah, fly on the wall is a great way to describe it. It's like, and I've had this thought many times, like, you're at Starbase or you're at the Cape or what have you, and you're waiting on a rocket launch, and there's some anomaly that's come up that their teams are working, and you're like, man, if I could just be a fly on the wall in the room right now where they're talking about all this stuff, and you actually got to be that fly on the wall in a lot of these circumstances. It's absolutely wild. And as you said, the book starts off with SpaceX. Sort of the premise, if correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of SpaceX succeeded as a commercial space company. They did it, and thus that sort of the ripple in the pond just started spreading, and all of these other companies started to try and do similar things, and all this venture capital money started flowing into the space, and you got all these little companies popping up. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like it's funny because you can't really see some of these things until hindsight. And the Falcon 1 was not like the most impressive rocket that had ever been built, but it was this like moment in time, and you could kind of feel it. At least I could, as I was looking out at the world and just reporting, was that it just like unlocked all this sort of passion and enthusiasm and hope that not to bash on sort of the old space characters too much, but that they kind of tapped it down over decades of doing things the same way and being so bureaucratic. And yeah, so anyway, that's why I started there. People say the prologue is quite long, but I really wanted everyone to know where this started and what made this happen.
I mean, just speaking personally, every section of the book I read, it was like I felt a sense of loss when it was over. I was like, oh man, I just want more. each section was so great that I kept wanting more, which I guess is a good place to leave your readers.
That's music to my ears. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I also
Go ahead, Adrian, please.
I also love the focus because you explained it briefly in the intro how you briefly mentioned these billionaires going to space, and then you shift the attention more to these companies that trying to achieve it, and I love the focus on that because I think if you look at these companies from a outside perspective, you could easily fall into the idea of like, yeah, I want to write about Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos next. But you went to the way and be like, no, I want to write about these, like about Firefly, about Astra, about Rocket Lab, and I feel like that's such a good choice that makes it such an interesting book because, yeah, they usually don't have this shiny person that just wants to talk about it. It's more a company. It's an effort of a big team. So I really love the choice of the topic.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think, it's kind of easy to focus on the billionaires to some degree because they have all this name recognition, and it's sort of like whatever. That's what the publishers want to see and and all that. But these other people were so fascinating to me, and it was clear to me we'd move past the billionaires. I think the public still sort of thinks this is just the realm of the super rich, kind of just with their toys, But it was obvious to me this was like a proper business that we were trying to build, and if you look at like Peter Beck and Rocket Lab story, you cannot find a more unlikely, crazy story of some guy has not been to college and he's building the second most successful commercial rocket company. That felt like a story to me.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it sort of closes the loop in my mind between like hobby high-powered rocketry, like, and the spectrum that goes from there all the way up to like a commercial launch provider, whether it's a small sat or what have you. But it's gotten to the point with technology that you don't need to be a billionaire, or you don't need to be, a full entire country and have the military industrial complex behind you. You can put some parts together and do some tinkering, and if you're a random guy from New Zealand and you have fun riding rocket bikes, then who knows, maybe you can pull something off like this with a really good team and a little bit of luck and just some stick-to-itiveness. It's pretty wild.
It is wild. I mean, I think like on one level, so Rocket Lab just, to me, it symbolized so much, right? About how far we'd come for all the reasons you nailed it. This is like a country with no aerospace experience. Like Americans weren't really even allowed to work on Rocket Lab's rockets. So you kind of had Peter, and then you had a bunch of 20-something Australians and Kiwis who had never actually worked on a working rocket program before trying to build this thing. And so, like, on the one hand, I think he's probably like a 1 in 7 billion kind of engineering savant who helped make a lot of this possible. But like on the other hand, it totally proved that maybe like not anywhere can have a space program, but pretty close if somebody's driven enough and you can get a chunk of money. If you could get far enough. I mean, Peter didn't start with much money at all, and eventually talked his way into some Silicon Valley dollars. But that was like really eye-opening to me. It actually I sort of think of Peter is almost being on this is like this 100-year culmination. Like, he reminded me so much of like Robert Goddard and some of the pioneers in like Russia and Germany, like from the 1910s. It was just like a dude who was really into rockets and was building them, and it felt like if we hadn't had, World War II and the Cold War, maybe space would have gone this more commercial route. And so I just thought Peter was like this throwback to where space, might have gone if history had taken some different directions.
Yeah, that's always
I
super fascinating to think about. Go ahead, Adrian.
I love the how Rocket Lab is also, so we of course have a lot of SpaceX missions. So sometimes the success of Electron as a rocket, I feel like, is even underappreciated, because recently I was reading the article about the latest Rocket Lab launch, and there was like the note of this being the 40th mission of the rocket, and it just I didn't notice. At some point I feel like it was in the 15th or somewhere around that area. And suddenly you're like, oh, that's a 40-flight rocket. That's a lot of flights for a rocket, and there are a lot of other rockets who never reach this milestone.
I mean, it's crazy that this dude is like underappreciated. This company is underappreciated. I mean, you got SpaceX and then Rocket Lab, and then everyone else, Firefly, Astra, Relativity. It's like one or two launches, and they kind of sort of worked, and back to the drawing board. Rocket Lab's the only. This is obviously, it's weird because we have so many rocket startups now, and just like we were talking about, there's this feeling that like anybody can kind of do this, and that's true on some level, but there's obviously something very, very, very hard about doing this over and over again. And like, Rocket Lab and SpaceX are the only ones that seem to have figured this out. And I think Peter's probably frustrated that they don't have the cadence up even much higher, but it seems like you can kind of feel, if you look at the recent, like the last 8 launches, like the cadence is starting to get up. They're about to, I think they're going to really hit their stride. And then Peter's and Rocket Lab are fascinating to me because they always seem to be like 5 or 6 steps ahead. They're quite secretive, but they're like working on all this stuff behind the scenes, and you've got Neutron, but then you've got all these other like bits of the business doing the bulk of a satellite, and all. Like, Peter's pretty clever. He's got lots of tricks up his sleeve. I think.
I remember when they announced the HASTE, the hypersonic test bed. I was like, "What? Oh, okay."
Yeah. They're like Apple, man. They and I've known Peter for a long time. I'm always trying to get stuff out of him. They keep that stuff close to the vest. Usually it's hard to do when you have enough engineers working on something, but whatever Peter threatens them with is working. So
he threatens them with being exceptionally cheerful and nice.
Even with their upcoming with the bigger rockets announcement, it was like out of nowhere, because Peter Beck over and over denied that that they would build a bigger rocket, and I love how he almost made a joke of the announcement, because he was like, "Yeah, we were gonna build a bigger rocket," and I feel like they have such a cool humor to them.
They do.
In the way they do things, and I think it's an underappreciated company. I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think some of that, I think he probably didn't think he would have to build one, and then I think the market sort of forced him into it a little bit. But if anyone's gonna, because they're talking about maybe 2024 for flying that thing. It's like, usually you hear those dates and you're like, whatever, I'll add 3 or 4 years onto that. But I think, I don't know if anyone's going to actually kind of pull that off. He usually doesn't say stuff like that unless he's pretty confident. So we'll see. They might get there sooner than we think.
That's super exciting. All right, so we're talking about, we're going through the list of small sat launchers, and we're kind of saying, it's sort of like SpaceX, obviously not a small sat launcher, but SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and everybody else. And earlier this year, we saw Virgin Orbit, go bankrupt. I don't know, like, journalistically, how you are, if you feel comfortable weighing in or what have you, but just what is your take on the small sat market with everything that you've seen? Like, daily space delivery, is there a market for that? Is that actually going to be a viable thing for companies to do? Or is sort of Rocket Lab going towards Neutron and going with a bigger rocket, is that kind of like a tell in a way.
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at the big picture, it's funny because yeah, after all this small satellite, small rocket enthusiasm, it seems like we're kind of now going back a little bit bigger. But when we definitely don't need 12 rocket companies, but I still think we're going to have a smaller group of rocket companies, and I do think there's going to be someone. I think there's going to be more than one with the small rocket doing launch on notice, and I, to me, if any of this stuff is real about these constellations and we're heading anywhere close to 100,000, 200,000 satellites, then there's just like it's inevitable to me. I mean,
Yeah,
even just on like some sort of like maintenance mode for everything that's up there, you're gonna want this. And I don't think people have wrapped their heads around what's going on yet, because I think there's gonna be so many customers that start to figure out like, oh, I can get on a pretty cheap rocket. It's Rocket Lab has ended up quite a bit more expensive than when they started. It was meant to be like 5 to 6 million, and now we're really up more like 10 to 12 million. And Astra has clearly had its struggles and is may or may not be around that much longer. But I think if somebody actually cracked this like million, 2 million, 3 million, then I just can't see why you would not have that. And I feel like we're at this there was all this enthusiasm because of low interest rates and the SPAC stuff, like all this money poured in, and now we're doing a little bit of separating the wheat from the chaff, and there's going to be a couple companies that go away, but I also think it's just like a momentary blip. We're at the beginning of this whole thing. I even think there's going to be um, I think because some of these companies took so much money, they sort of screwed up their it was like a Faustian bargain. They screwed up their
yeah.
business a bit. I think there'll be like clean slate rocket companies that appear again in a couple of years and try to do it all over again in a different, cheaper way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And like these things are
Uh,
still they still are like handcrafted to a large degree. Like Astra's thing was to try to make a car assembly line for rockets, and I still think that's like kind of the goal. I mean, you see SpaceX and Rocket Lab, you look at their factory floor, they got a bunch of rocket bodies out there, and obviously SpaceX would be like furthest along on however this is going to happen, but still we're still like a ways to go for making this kind of like a mass manufacturing simplified operation. Maybe it's like impossible, maybe that's why nobody's done it, but I feel like um, that's kind of what Astra was trying to do, and I don't know they're going to get to see this mission through, but I think that mission is still sitting out there for somebody to get right.
I sure hope they can pull it off, and if not them, somebody. But because, like you said, it's that sort of seems like it should be the goal, right? I mean, we can mass produce cars. We have the technology. We know how to do an assembly line. So, like, let's get there with a rocket. And we're seeing footage here of a tour I did of Astra's factory. This is actually the second one they've let us do. So, it's always nice when a company is like open with what they're doing and trying to build hype, because if people didn't care, if people weren't excited, then what's the point of all this? Like that's an important facet, but I digress. It's really cool to see them try and pump out rockets like you would pump out cars using automotive manufacturing techniques. So
Yeah,
uh fingers
that
crossed. I
factory
hope
is
they
that
go ahead.
factory is cool, man. I've spent so
It's
much
so
time in
cool.
there. I'm looking at the images. It's like giving me both excitement and PTSD at the same time.
Yeah, right. Just take a right from here and then go left, and then you got the snacks. Just go to the snack cave. That's the happy place. Oh man. Let's see here. We are getting a bunch of questions coming in. Adrian, is there something you wanted to go for before I start just jumping into questions here?
Yeah, I would like to ask, for example, when you approached these companies first, and when they knew you would write about them, were there like some companies that were maybe not really happy initially when you approached them, or you had to do more convincing work?
Well, it's kind of funny. I think I was in a sort of lucky position because the Elon book had come out and done really well, and I've been a journalist for a long time with a long track record. So I think had like I like to think a decent reputation, and then you know it was just like the perfect time where that book sort of hit, and so I think part of it was like, oh, this guy seems like maybe he knows what he's doing. And then if I'm totally honest, I think some people kind of fancy themselves as the next Elon or SpaceX, and it's kind of like, yeah, well, let's show the world what we're doing. You know, when I didn't always know it was going to be a book, so it was like roughly 2016, 2017. I worked on this thing for a long time, and I was kind of like surveying the playing field. It was like, well, who's gonna survive? Who's sort of like realistic in some kind of time frame? Like I loved Spin Launch, and I was there before they were ever like known about. And
Where
but you
we have
know,
to, okay, put a pin in that. Put a pin in that. We got to go back to that, but please continue.
but when you saw their roadmap, they were pretty public. They're saying like 2026 or whatever. And you know, in space time, I always again add a couple years to that. So I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm going to be around doing this book then. And Relativity was fascinating, but same thing. They've actually gone faster than I thought they would have. I thought that they were taking so much on that was going to stretch out, and like Virgin Orbit, I just feel bad. I just never got the best vibes. You know, they seemed like they had taken so long, and they had a ton of the early SpaceX team. It was confusing to me why they were going so slow. So I kind of picked the people I wanted to focus on, and then no, I mean it was all right. You know, and everyone to their credit, especially Astra, especially Max at Firefly. Um, they were just like, look, we'll let you see everything, write whatever you're gonna write, good or bad. This is gonna either end great or badly, and that's okay. Just follow this journey. And I'd always want, especially Astra was cool because I had always wanted to follow any company, whether it was like biotech or rocket, whatever, from like day one to their first major product, just to see what that journey looks like. And so I got to do that. And Chris was, you know, I think Chris doesn't love everything that's in the book. I'm sure he hates parts of it, but I give him like total credit. He, from the beginning, he's never tried to like put any restrictions on anything I did. I'm sure Max feels the same love and hates as well. So but you know, it's a strange relationship. But anyway, no, nobody, everyone was pretty cool. Nobody tried to like to tell me what I could or couldn't do along the way.
When you're in a boardroom or a conference room or what have you, and you're watching like these conversations take place, I mean, I'm just take photos of things. You know, I'm not really a journalist in that way, but like, are you sort of like trying to melt into the wallpaper, or are you, you know, like what is that like? I mean, is it literally like fly on the wall kind of deal, or?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's days when I'm doing like sit down interviews with people to get their life story, and it's this very active thing. But no, yeah, anytime there was like a rocket launch, important meeting, somebody getting yelled at, I try to make myself as small as possible. Like, first of all, I don't want to get in the way of them like doing their job. You don't want to be if I become like a burden, you're gonna get thrown out of this place. And these people have like work to do, and I respect that. So yeah, no, you know, you just try to. I wanted to get as close to reality as I could, and it's like you know, there is some change to reality just by having an observer there.
Of course.
But the more you can just kind of like reduce yourself to shut up and sit in the corner, and you do in these situations. It's kind of funny, like as a journalist, sometimes the best thing you can do is just shut up, you know, and just watch and take your notes.
It's definitely one of the things I really enjoyed about the book is just the fact that it feels like you're there. Like we feel like we're in your shoes. Like we have the benefit of your point of view in experiencing all of these different moments, and it's not like a, you know, and there's a place for it, but it's not like a, you know, a textual documentary which is like, and today they did this thing, and it's like very, you know, it's real life. Like this is real stuff, real companies, real people trying to launch things into orbit, and it's, I don't know, just delightful. I'm sorry I'm like gushing with praise over here, but I'm like, no kidding.
Well,
When I got the
I'll
book,
take it.
I sat there and I read it until it was done. Like I think I ate some food. I think I might have slept like a little bit, but it was seriously like I opened the cover and I just kept going. It's such a good
uh,
book.
Oh man, that's awesome to hear. You know, I was lucky too. Like on this one, we were filming a documentary. Like I raised some money pretty early on to get cameras in, and I think that like really benefited it because sometimes like as a journalist, I'd like pop in, do my interviews, and leave, and it's not like transactional, but it's just like I'm here today to do this thing. Whereas like with the documentary, you're hanging around a lot, waiting for something to happen, and so I ended up with just like all this amazing, super clear audio and like um it really changed it changes. So when I went to write the book, I just wanted to I was like, oh, I think I could do this a little bit differently, especially in some of the sections where I kind of lean on this asset that I have. And you know, like sorry, just the last point is just I mean, like as a writer, you're gonna have your point of view, especially in a book. But really, I try to, like, just present what's happening and let people make their own judgments, and so, like, being in the room and just being able to write what actually happened, and then it's like you can make up your own mind if you think they handled the situation well or not. That's kinda my goal on a lot of that stuff.
Heck yeah. Oh man.
Can we
Let's.
so the spin we mentioned spin launch.
Oh
Oh, yeah.
right.
Can we go back to that pin?
Okay.
Mhm.
I just to preface this, I know not a lot about spin launch. I know the basics. Um, to me, it's kind of utterly bonkers. Well, I was just in New Mexico last month for Virgin's Galactico 2 flight, and I finally found the right road to drive down in the middle of the desert there to get to their facility. And just sitting outside the gate looking at this massive contraption, it's just like, really? I mean, are you sure about that? I don't, but you said you're really excited by it. I mean, explain that a little bit, maybe like your
Well,
excitement or.
yeah, I mean, the early days were, you know, before New Mexico, they were in Silicon Valley, in Sunnyvale, in like if you've ever been in Silicon Valley, it's just all these like low slung office buildings for the most part, sort of like strip mall style um office spots. And that's they were in a building like next to a printer, you know, and just some bog standard company. And the first time I heard about it, it was like, oh, this company's built like a centrifuge in the building and they're throwing, you know, projectiles into a wall. And my expectations were pretty low, but I got in there, totally had this giant working centrifuge in the middle of a building. They could throw like a metal projectile into a laser point, you know, with perfect accuracy. And when they would throw it, I mean, this huge noise would go. I just kept wondering like what the neighbors thought was going on when
Yeah,
you
is that the sort of
slam.
thing you have to notify your landlord or neighbors? Like, hey, by the way,
This is what I
centrifuge.
this is what I kept wondering is like, how are you guys getting away with this? And then the company had like it had this weird thing where there were almost like dorm rooms inside this facility, and like 20 or 25 of the workers like basically lived. It was like a rocket commune or sweatshop or so. A lot of them, I wouldn't say commune because the spin launch they were a little more red state than blue state as far as rocket
Okay.
companies go. There's a lot of ex-military people. But yeah, so I was blown away. I thought this idea is insane. I kind of called a couple people who I respect, like Pete Warden, who used to run NASA Ames and is in the book. You know, he's like, I
Yep.
don't know. I think this has a chance. You know, I think it's still people are still super skeptical that any sort of electronics in that thing will like survive being thrown up against the atmosphere. But they've run the test, and then now they were just I thought that would be like the end point, but they were a precursor because now there's a couple like railgun startups and you know they're not even like alone now. Other people are going to try to shoot stuff to the edge of space. So
So wild.
um, I give them credit because you know they built that thing in Sunnyvale quick. Look at all this footage, you know, from New Mexico. Although this might be like a hopeful animation, but um, you know they've gotten really far. That team is no joke. They work pretty quick.
Yeah, it's.
Is
I mean, as much as I joke and express skepticism, like I'm happy that they exist, and I'm happy that they are trying something new and different. Because at some point, we have to transition away from chemical rockets, whatever that looks like. Chemical rockets are not the end game. They're just sort of like where we are right now in the state of the art. So
It,
whether there will be ever bigger centrifuges, and who knows, like I have no idea, but I appreciate them trying something novel.
Jonathan's he's like similar to Peter. He didn't go to college either. I don't think he's just like this entrepreneur that pulled his stuff together. I remember now. I'm just going back in my memory bank. I mean, we put like an iPhone on the end of the centrifuge in the place at Sunnyvale and spun it up to like some ridiculous number of thousands of G's and like made a call to the iPhone while it was like spinning inside of there.
You're like, is
"See,
this
Did it
it worked.
like respond? Did you hear something?
Like I forget what we were doing. It was some, it was like a Skype or I forget what we were doing. And yeah, it worked. I mean, they were trying to prove to me that you could put these electronics under ridiculous loads and that they would still work. And yeah, it worked.
That's super nifty. It's like, hello, is this the centrifuge? It answered. It answered, you guys. Oh, so cool.
When they would throw the projectiles into the wall, I mean, the metal would just like disintegrate, and they would have to kick on this vacuum to start sucking up the shrapnel before it was spreading out through the whole room. It was insane.
Oh, so cool. Let's see here. Ross is
have something.
asking who. Oh, go
Okay.
ahead, please. No, you first.
No, I'm just like for the right now wondering if you ever would write another book about space startups right now, because we have a new generation coming up right now. We have, for example, Stoke. We have the European ones. We have a lot of like next generation right now. Is there like some company where you're like, if I ever write such a book again, they need to be in them?
I mean, I'm a bit emotionally scarred after doing this book. It was like 6 years. The thought of doing another space book right in my very near term is like I need some. I got to clear out some some trauma.
You need to cleanse.
But yeah, actually, Spin Lodge would be very close to the top of that list, just because I think Jonathan's. I kind of go like character first, and then technology on top of that. So yeah, I don't know, man. I it's weird because I've now feel like I'm so deep into this, and you want to make use of your knowledge and all your contacts and all that stuff, but I'm like I need a little breather. I might like wait to see how things shake out a little bit and then come back. I'm sure, if Rocket Lab keeps going on this trajectory, I mean, they will deserve like a much even a longer, deeper dive into them as well at some point, I'm sure. So yeah, no, I'm gonna wait and see on this one.
So you said that there is a documentary. Is that with HBO? Am I remembering that correctly?
That's right. Yeah, I'm like a little limited on what I can say. HBO tells me, otherwise I would tell people everything. But I was like basically filming from day one with, as I set out on this book, so kind of roughly 2016, 2017, a bunch of footage with Astra, Rocket Lab. We did a little spin launch. Firefly, went to Ukraine with Max, went to like the old I'm the only person ever to get a camera into the old Soviet ICBM factories and the old like Ukrainian rocket testing sites in the forest. The documentary will be a little more contained than the book, so not quite as many characters, and it's meant to tell a mainstream audience, what's going on with commercial space and give them a feel for what this looks like. But so we've got some really, like, you can tell some of the parts from the book where stuff where it's kind of like oral history ish, that a lot of that was like filmed, and so you can get like a flavor. I wanted to show people same thing. I wanted to show them what this looks like, and it's not always like your most your best and brightest, like most courageous pilot. Sometimes it's like two dudes in a trailer watching a Cowboys game, like talking about how they hate their job, and so a little bit of a flavor for that. And I kind of produced this and help get it going. And then I wish I could name our producing partners because it's like as big of names as you could imagine, like ET level production partners on
All
this.
right.
So
Heck
just
yeah.
to keep it space themed, yeah.
That's amazing.
And hopefully,
I am.
hopefully it should be out
Go ahead.
next year with a bit of luck. Yeah.
I'm so excited for it. And you said it's like for a mainstream audience, which makes sense because HBO.
Yeah.
I don't know if you as a producer can like weasel something in there for all of us super nerds out there, but if at any point during this series or I assume it's going to be like episodic series kind of thing,
No, this is a
or is
film.
it
This is like
one? It's a film.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, just like take 5 minutes at some point and just be like, all right, normal people, you can glaze your eyes over. Nerds, it's nerd time. Oh
I
man.
think we got some good nerdery in there. There's lots of like cause. It's always this battle, right? To try and yeah, because like I hate dumbing things down. I want people to learn, and I sort of like write for engineers on some level, so I don't want them to feel like they're bored or anything. But yeah, it's hard when you're doing something for HBO to know where that line is. We thought about doing a series at one point. That's kind of how it started, and I wish we'd fully been able to pull that off. But it was this is like my first time. I make a television show called Hello World. It's like a tech travel show, but this was my first time doing something like on this giant scale, and I had to tame it into a film.
Makes sense. I bet it's going to be awesome.
I hope so.
And I mean, okay. Oh, geez, I have to ask. You said you and the film crew went to Ukraine. There's a footnote in When the Heavens Went on Sale.
Oh no.
Let me put it this way. In the film, will there be potentially any footage of a pig exploding from a bazooka or any other means for any reason?
You have gone to like one of my favorite footnotes. Yeah, Max
It's the
was
best
not
footnote
pleased.
I've ever read, ever.
Not pleased with that one. Sadly, well, I don't know if it's sadly. No, there will not be footage of that.
Good. Okay, good.
I think that was a little off limits. Yeah.
I had to do it. I'm sorry. I had to ask. Oh man. So, Adrian, did you have another question here?
No, go ahead with viewer questions.
Okay, excellent. I mean, we kind of covered this one already a few minutes ago, but Atrium is asking, or Artium, sorry, I'm butchering your name, is asking whether you would like to do a follow-up on any of the companies in the book. Obviously, after some time and some space. You said Rocket Lab probably would deserve a bigger piece. Is there like, would you like to go back to Planet and do more, with them, or how are you after some time? After some time.
So Artium's actually in the book. This is like a secret agent out here asking questions. He's
Uh-oh.
we're good friends. I spent a lot of time with him in Ukraine and all over the States. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess in the big picture, it's still hard, kind of like we talked about, to settle on one character in particular. But like we talked about at the very beginning of the chat, I mean, I really do think we're in inning 1 or 2. So I am beyond sort of like Planet specifically. I am so curious to see what happens with what is being built now, because I feel like we're just putting the foundation in. Even this last year was really cool. I mean, there's stuff happening that like I did not expect to come this quickly. I went to Varda down in Los Angeles, and Astroforge down in Los Angeles, and Impulse, Tom Mueller's new company, over the last couple months. And Varda and Astroforge did SpaceX ride shares. They've already put their like prototypes for making pharmaceuticals in space and asteroid mining. That like happened this year. This is all stuff that I would have thought would be like 5-6 years away at best. The other one is probably like, I don't know if I would do it now that I've done kind of the Wild West thing. I mean, Blue Origin is still like the mystery in all of this. I like hasn't quite come close to doing enough yet, but is possibly, if anyone is going to emerge as like a major SpaceX competitor who has like the money to do it, I mean, it's them. And it's like, if they can ever get their act together, would be like a very formidable. And like the Chinese space program is very interesting. And I think there's probably a book in like the decline of the Russian space program and sort of
That
what
would be.
that looks like.
I mean,
Actually, sorry,
where do I?
I'm gonna like answer a little bit on this question now that I'm thinking about it and brainstorming. I mean, there is a book that there's like at least there's a huge magazine story I've always wanted to do on like the infrastructure of all this stuff. And like I went to Svalbard for some reporting and didn't even get to put much of it in the book, but it's like amazing, all these satellites pumping tons of information into the North Pole. It's like nobody lives there. There's like 7 people at KSAT managing this huge chunk of the world's infrastructure. And then you go somewhere like French Guiana for a launch, it's such a poor country. And then you have this massive space center there that's just nuts. Like I'm sure it's different now because of the war, but it was like the Russians live over on this side and the Europeans live over on. There's so much like to the like underbelly of the mechanics of how all this stuff works that I still find fascinating. It would be a cool book of like how does space actually kind of function globally on that level. You've talked me into it. I mean, I've always wanted to do that story. I'm going to do that story now.
I mean, let me know where to subscribe or whatever, like what magazine or newspaper or whatever what book I need to buy. I mean, I'm signing up right now for all of these brainstorm ideas. But the Blue Origin thing is like you said, it maybe because you've done the Wild West thing, it would be, I don't know. But if you could crack that nut, because they really are so secretive, and yet simultaneously between doing and showing very little appear to be right on the cusp of being about to do a whole lot. It's like it feels like a lot of these other companies building rockets are assembling a steamroller and trying to get the steamroller out on the road, whereas Blue Origin somehow has created this, I don't know if it's an illusion or reality or what, where they've got the steamroller. It's in the building. We're not going to show you it. We're not going to open the doors to the building, but it's in there. It's ready to go. It's ready to make the road. So if you could crack that nut, man, that would be, especially with a contrast between the crazy Wild West, and because of all the different companies trying to build rockets now, Blue Origin seems like the most, I guess for lack of a better word, like traditional, the most old space, in that they are very much like test it again, test it again, test it again, test it again, etc.
Which
and Adrian, I'm sure you would. Yeah, it could be. And Adrian, I'm sure you would. I mean, I know I also would love some information on the Chinese, all the various commercial space companies in the Chinese space program, because it's wild. There's so many companies building so many rockets, and it's insane.
I almost got to go to a launch. I got like all the government clearance. I was going for, I think Kepler was putting up some satellites, and I was going to be the first Western reporter by a long shot to be like at the launch site, and had my tickets, was all ready to go. And the day before I left, like a general in the Chinese military stopped it, and they're like,
Dang.
you can watch it from the Beijing Museum of Science and Technology. I was like, that's okay.
As a person who very much likes to cover the Chinese space program, it would be really cool to see a launch live, but I guess it's really hard to get really access at this point. It seems like over the time they got even more secretive about their space program and access. So I feel like if you would ask today, they would probably not even respond at this point. They would be. It's like,
I couldn't believe it. I was so excited, and then I couldn't believe that it like actually got stopped by somebody that high up. And I guess he must have seen whatever emails or something passed along, and I wish that hadn't happened. I was really excited.
Dang it. I feel like a lot of times across this industry, it's just so much easier for people somewhere in the chain of management to say no than say yes. And it's like a self-preservation kind of thing. It totally makes sense, but that's part of why it's so freaking cool when a company lets an organization like NSF do a tour, or a journalist such as yourself embed, which is a whole nother level, like orders of magnitude. But it's just that openness, you love to see it because you don't always get to see it. And I mean, you only get to live so long. I think we all want to see cool stuff happen, and we're, like you said, we're laying the foundation for the cool stuff for the entire next century here, and that's really exciting when you're actually allowed by the companies to get excited about the things.
Yeah, and it's like a new era. I mean, it's such a weird thing because yes, okay, these are like ICBMs on some level, and there's military restrictions around some of this stuff, but at the same time, God, I mean, it's changed so much. If like a dude in New Zealand can hop on the internet and read some textbooks and make Rocket Lab, then like maybe we don't have to be so super secret protective about
Right.
everything because this seems doable, you know, for anyone who's motivated enough. So yeah, I mean, it's funny that they get it's understandable, but also very frustrating that these get treated like these great national secrets. I mean, Astra was hilarious because they were, you know, when they were stealth space and all secretive, they're in Alameda in this neighborhood. There's like houses 1,000 yards away, and they had the rocket stood up in the back of their little factory for months before anybody even noticed that that blew my mind because Chris and I had kind of made this deal where I would keep everything secret till they launched for the first time. I was like, Chris, people are gonna notice that you have like a missile sitting up in your outside of this factory, and like nobody really noticed for a really long time. And it blew me away that you could kind of get that far with something that's supposed to be super sensitive technology, and that people, I don't know, it just, the whole thing is weird. I think it's a different time.
Here we have a question from our own Lon here, asking, with the commercial space providers all somewhat dependent on government contracts, what do commercial space operators think or hope might accelerate development beyond government dependency? Would that be like resource harvesting or tourism, or you mentioned earlier like maintenance of these mega constellations or what have you? Because
I mean,
yeah, I mean
yeah.
commercializing it, that's gonna be kind of key here.
You know, is like that statement is both true and not. Yes, like a lot of these companies are, the government contracts are helping them get going, helping them through lean times. If we look at, you know, in 2020, I mean, you guys, probably lots of people on this podcast know this, but like on the show, but in 2020 we had like 2,500 satellites in LEO, and now we have close to 9,000. You know, the vast majority of those are SpaceX commercial satellites.
Yep.
We've flipped the switch, you know. I mean, that's like a huge change because out of that 2,500, most of those were sort of scientific, government funded. You did have some, obviously, for communications and things like that, but this whole new addition over the last 3 years is almost all commercial, and SpaceX is just like the tip of the spear. Obviously, you got OneWeb doing the same thing. Amazon is about to come with all their satellites. All these other countries, you know, China's going to want a space internet. I'm sure Russia would like space internet, and all the imaging satellites, you know, the next big constellations are the imaging stuff. That's all commercial. And so I think this is like changing pretty quick. Like the government stuff is, I don't think this industry could function without it. So I don't want to underplay that, but that is a big part of the thesis of my book. I don't know that all these business models are going to work out, but we are about to find out if they will. And I think most of this is going to be commercial.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and you think about it. Go ahead, Adrian.
It's such an interesting topic because we come from a time where basically the government was the sole way to have really a sustainable way to go into space, and I mean we see it slowly starting. I would also argue with crew flights even, which is kind of impressive because you see SpaceX moving away from not only having crew missions to the ISS, but also missions that are privatized. And I think it's it's actually quite impressive that we are already in a time where we see privatized missions to space with people on board. I mean, the Polaris
Totally.
missions
Yeah.
probably being like the the main thing here, but there's all others coming as well. So it's kind of impressive how they turn this government contract now into a business model.
And you got like actual space habitat startups coming pretty quickly. And then, like, I am not traditionally, part of the book is arguing like the moon and Mars are great, but all the action is in Leo. But quite quickly, the moon is actually turning into like again, I think a capitalist exercise more than a government exercise. It's funny how it splits up too, because the United States is the only place where you really have this healthy mix of government and then tons of commercial activity between all the rocket companies and the satellites. New Zealand's interesting. They have almost like no government, and they have about 12 space startups, and so they're sort of like this outlier as this only commercial space. China's this weird mix where the government is driving everything right now, and they're trying to do these like quasi commercial players. And then Russia, nothing commercial. Europe, like fledgling commercial. So at the moment, it's like this United States, New Zealand story of commercial space. But I think in both places, commercial, is running so much faster than the government side that it becomes dominant. And then we end up in this weird place where it's like most of the world is doing government backspace, but like over here it's this commercial thing. And so I'm so curious to see how this plays out. I think Europe has a lot of questions to answer, about how they've been approaching this, because they need to like catch up really fast. And I think Russia is going to be this weird, crazy wild card in all of this. If SpaceX was already eating away at the Soyuz business, they had a lot of corruption and terrible spending in their space program. The war has cut off like tons of their customers. They've got no space startups. So like what happens when this traditional space superpower, where this isn't even just like a nice thing to have, it like runs in their blood, it's a point of national pride. What do you do? What do they do when like the world moves on? And it might not be like a super rational set of actions in all of this. So I'm quite curious to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, also
That's
from a
that's really fascinating. Go
European
ahead, Adrian.
perspective, it's such an interesting, because you pointed it out. Because I feel like rockets need this initial capital somehow, because rockets, of course, have a long lead up time. It takes time to develop a rocket, as you point out in your books a lot. It's not easy to get a rocket onto the pad, and then you probably need multiple attempts. So you need a lot of capital before that either comes from a person that has a lot of money already, see billionaires, or you have the government. And I think if you compare the States, for example, to Europe, and what has been a success model of the States versus Europe is that the States actually help these companies develop these initial contracts. You have contracts like the commercial cargo contract that then helped SpaceX develop a Falcon 9. On the other hand, you have Europe, where we have all of these startups, and then you see like these contracts of, I don't know, 15 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but of course, in overall rocketry, with 15 million, you will not build a Falcon 9 competitor. With 15 million, you won't build the next level space company. And it's such a different world compared to the States.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Because I bash on NASA a fair bit in my book, but like, to their credit, have cut some very large checks to help push some of these things along. But yeah, I mean, the U.S. I hadn't thought about it quite in those terms. You're totally right. Like the U.S. has this interesting balance where they are also willing to take pretty significant risks on some of these companies. And then, the U.S. has the Defense Department has been like salivating over all this stuff for decades, so they're quite excited. I think we get to an interesting point though, where like, I don't know how we're like on the verge of it, right? So like Electron has small rockets down, SpaceX has like larger rockets pretty much down. We've got some quite promising other rocket companies like kind of getting close maybe to the point where they can start dialing some things in. Like the rocket part of this on some level will be sort of solved, I think, in the next like 5 to 15 years. And like once that happens, once you've got all the airplanes and that infrastructure, then like all this money can just be poured into the satellites and the data and the interesting applications up above. It just we sort of got to get to this point where we've got this base, very expensive, very hard base level kind of taken care of, and then I think things really accelerate from there.
Fingers crossed. You've seen so much. I mean, you've been, like we talked about, a fly on the wall in so many of these like critical moments. I can't even I can't even begin to imagine. Like, I get stressed when people around me are stressed. Like, I would have a hard time removing myself from that. But like, what have you learned from the leaders in these companies, like at moments like that, where like a single little failure could cause a huge explosion or what have you? Like, what does it take to run a company like this? Like, what does it take to be a Peter Beck or a Elon Musk or a Max Polyakov or a Chris Kemp, or any of these people trying to do this?
It's a good question because they're all so different in various ways. And
Which
you're
I have a
totally right.
follow-up question to that, but please continue.
Well, and like even as a reporter, I'm supposed to be sort of dispassionate, but man, I mean, I feel, on the launch days is like I feel like the adrenaline and I feel the pain. I'm sure it's a fraction of what these guys do. I don't know. They all run the company so different, like Max, he reminds me of Elon in a lot of ways. Is just like such a huge risk taker. Like he's wealthy, but he's like not Jeff Bezos, Elon wealthy, and put $250 million into Firefly. There's just like not many people that would do something like that. And I certainly wouldn't. I mean, he could have given that money to his family for generations to come. And so there's still, I think it's that like risk taking. I always felt like Peter is almost like commanded from a higher power to have to build a rocket engine. It seems like this was, I don't know, like he could live life if he was not doing this. So to me, like Peter just has kind of this higher calling. I think we're at this interesting stage now where the first wave with the billionaires, it was all like, I grew up on Star Trek and now I'm rich and space is cool and I want to do this, or obviously all this stuff is like sexy and interesting, and space itself comes with all this mythology and romance, but we're in a different stage now. It's like it's a business, at least that's what I'm arguing, and so I don't know if like all the motivations are going to be the same. And I wonder what this does to space over time, if it gets like less romantic somehow as it's just a business that either does well or it doesn't, and I don't know if you're agonizing over like every launch when launches start happening every day.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, but yeah, I don't know if there's like a unifying principle among these guys other than risk taking. It was fascinating to see that, like, I think as a business reporter, I had underestimated, maybe stupidly, um, the influence that the CEO has over the company. Like I always just thought it was like, oh, you're kind of the quarterback, and like, yeah, you got to make some big decisions. What I saw was that like the CEO's personality sort of bleeds through the entire company and starts to like define it. Like when you go to Rocket Lab, you can eat off the factory floor and every tool is in the perfect place. And this is just like how Peter runs his life, and you just see it reflected in like everything's pretty, almost to a fault. And like the rockets always work. And, it's just, you can see that it just comes from this guy. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer.
No, that's absolutely satisfying. I do appreciate that, because a lot of times it's sort of like, are we deifying the person at the top because that's human nature? Are we ascribing? It's like Steve Jobs,
Yeah.
Jobs and Apple and the iPhone, and it's like, of course, Steve has haters out there. Apple has haters out there. It's totally fine. You can like what you like, everybody out there watching this, but I think it's pretty undeniable, especially with Steve having gotten banished and then coming back. Like you can see his influence on the company and on their products, like all the way down the chain. But you don't always know if that's the case for every single of these CEOs or every one of these companies. But that was a very, very satisfying answer. Thank you.
I mean, and all this stuff is obviously teamwork. Like in the Astra part of the book, I went to great pains to try to highlight different people's life stories to show, this is a group effort. But yeah, I think people might not like to hear. Look at Elon, whether you love him or like hate him with a passion. I mean, SpaceX does not exist without this guy being like possessed by this quest. There's no doubt about it. It just doesn't happen.
Yep. So thankful that it exists, because I mean, I always say this because we want to see cool stuff happen. We want to see it happen now. So I'm very happy for that. So would you say that, sort of following with that, each of these companies has their own like methodology and way they go about things? Are there like any similarities that you've noticed, or any major differences? Like, oh, Rocket Lab would never do that, kind of thing. Like Rocket Lab would never build a rocket in tents out in the middle of nowhere in Texas.
They might do that if they had to. I think, Rocket Lab and Astra are sort of like foils against each other in the book. I think Astra's theory was always that Rocket Lab had over-engineered their rocket and it was too expensive and they just made it too perfect. And we're going to make a super cheap rocket. We're not going to worry about testing very much. We're just going to throw it up, change things. And there's like some happy medium in there. I think, if you look at their track records, I mean, I know for a fact, Peter Beck thinks he just thought like Astra was fundamentally flawed and philosophically wrong from the get-go, and that Chris Kemp was like over his skis a bit on all of this, and just like for Peter, I think it would have like hurt his soul to set up a rocket that wasn't kind of like trying to do its mission perfectly from the beginning. So yeah, I don't know if I saw a ton of like, I'm sort of hoping to see some similarities and like clear lessons learned, from New Space, like things to avoid if you're trying to build a rocket company. But it seemed like everybody really was going after it a little bit differently, and all had like, they also have such different backstories as how they get into it, and that affects things too. So no, I don't know if I saw, I just don't know if I saw this like real common thread across them.
Oh, well, it's even more interesting because it's all different, it's all different Lego pieces. I don't even know why my brain went there, but there it went. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm gonna ask some viewer questions here. We've got a whole bunch of really good viewer questions, but because
Okay.
I'm the host, I can be self-indulgent and ask another one of my own questions. Don't worry, it's not about the pig. Um, so you wake up tomorrow and you're checking your email inbox, and you have an email or whatever communique from some space CEO, and it's just, "Hey Ashley, let's grab a beer. When are you free?" And you're like, "Yes!" Or drink of choice, whatever it is, lemonade, water. Um, who would you be most excited to, just like outside of a journalistic setting, just like hang out, have a drink, chat? Either somebody from the book or somebody that you've met in your travels, or just trying to kind of get a vibe for like who would you like to be hanging out with if you had an evening to sort of just hang out with?
Yeah, this is a great question. Like Max was kind of my favorite person from the book to hang out with if we're having like a beer or a scotch or something like that. He's like endlessly entertaining and interesting. I think honestly, not to God, I feel like this is too easy. I should have a more creative answer. I kind of think it's Bezos because Blue Origin's been this mystery, and I like really want to pick his brain about how he feels about what's happened for the last 20 years, and how he
Yeah.
sees this playing out.
No,
I choose
that's not even That's a really good answer because I think
That's
we would
just
all want to.
immediately. That's just
We
who's
would all
jumping
want
to
that
mind.
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good deal. Good
I
deal.
have an answer to this as well because I've thought about this now as well. I would pick Gwen Shotwell because I
Ooh.
always feel like there's not enough talk, not enough spotlight, and not enough like just letting her talk in public
Yeah.
of Gwen Shotwell. I would just want to hear her perspective on basically everything involving SpaceX. That would be my
That's
pick.
That's a great answer.
That's a
I
really
mean,
good pick.
I think that's like a survival mechanism because Elon doesn't always love it when other people get attention. I think this is by design. That's a great answer, and Gwen is fun to talk to. I was trying to convince her to run for president. I think she'd do. I think she'd have a shot.
I'd vote for her. Oh man. See, now I'm thinking about what I would. I don't even know. I have no idea. So I'm glad both of you had good answers.
I kind of
I
want somebody
actually have a follow-up.
like from the Russian space program, but only if they speak like honestly, and I get all the dirt.
Yeah.
So
You had a
I have
follow-up?
a follow-up question. Yeah, because you have talked with Elon, you have talked with Gwen, and we have recently heard stories about, or like a year ago, that now Starbase is more in charge of Gwen Shotwell. Like she has taken over more of the management parts there, more of the reins. So I wonder if what's your your thoughts on that, with how that might change operations there and how they differentiate in running such a place like Starbase.
Well, I'm sure anytime she shows up, it's probably for the better because what an amazing track record of operating things. You know, my general sense with Elon, God, this is probably going to make some people sad on this call. You know, it's just like the Twitter thing has been a huge distraction. I think all this AI stuff is like back on the top of his mind again. You know, he was spending. This is not to say like he's not like doing stuff at SpaceX, but he was spending a lot of time at Twitter for a long time, and I'm sure Starbase needed some attention and tender, you know, love and care. The Twitter plus AI thing, I don't know if you guys feel it, but you know, Elon
Oh
doesn't
yeah.
talk about Mars and everything as much as he kind of used to. This is all sort of a shock to me in a lot of ways because that was
Same.
like of all of Elon's, you know, mercurial crazy crap he does, it was like Mars was the constant and SpaceX was the baby. And like I always imagined him paring things back over time, especially like Tesla. What you know, Tesla's fine now. It will survive and like thrive. And I kind of never knew when the company would get to that point, but I thought when it did, maybe Elon finally sort of like steps away from that a bit to give SpaceX. I just always thought like SpaceX would get more and more time as the years went on, and it just does not look that way at all. So, but you know, there's all these rumors floating around all the time that Gwen is like looking to retire. I'm not saying there's truth to this because I actually have no inside information on this. I just see stuff floating around. You know, that she was kind of like getting ready to pull back. So it's interesting if she's anyway. I think it only benefits SpaceX if she's really digging in on Starbase.
Yeah, I mean, I
tot-
definitely have felt the. It feels like he's spending a lot of time doing other things, and it's. I don't know if like I'm trying to be an optimist about it. Like perhaps we're at a point where he feels that SpaceX does not need that level of micromanagement, and because like you said, like Tesla's fine. So maybe in his mind he's thinking, SpaceX is fine. I can move to these other tasks, but yeah, I sure miss going on Twitter and seeing him talk about Mars or post things about Starship, because he still does, but I feel like it was the frequency we used to be a lot more, and it used to be a lot more of like an inspirational, like let's do this for humanity kind of thing, and now not quite as much.
I think,
It's
and
weird.
I see
It's a vibe.
Kevin in the I see
Yeah.
Kevin in the back channel saying that the exact same I was about to say. I think this might be a situation where Elon right now is aware that he cannot really like accelerate Starship by micromanaging it anymore. It just needs to get to a point where it's maturing and works. And I think once that has like completed, that might be a moment where you can right now I don't think it would help to have this message about let's go to Mars, because you need to complete this step right now. They need to focus on getting Starship launching, because that is the enabler for all what follows. And once you have Starship going, that might be a point where then he comes back with this message again, because that's the point, like, you have the vehicle. That was the goal all along. So I think this might be more like a side questing break, and then he turned it's to giving some gamification, and then he returns once this baby phase of Starship, and it's so funny to talk Starship about baby phase because that thing is huge. But
It's a big baby.
yeah, that's my optimism here.
That makes sense.
I like the side quest. The side quest thing is interesting. Well, that's the big question. Like, is this a side quest, or has he kind of gotten obsessed by these other things that he thinks are like existential, more immediate existential moments? I wish like the Twitter thing had never happened. It's just like, it seems like I'm not even like one of these hysterical journalists, like he's ruining Twitter. I sort of don't care. I just think it's just like a colossal waste of energy and time, and there's very little. I feel like there's little to be gained, and the world will change not very much as a result of all this.
Yep, couldn't agree more. I love the side quest thing. Adrian spoken like a true dungeon master.
That was good.
He's going for 100% completion. He wants to get all the stars. And of course, when you're Adrian, I can't help this. When you're saying he'll come back to Starship when it's up and running, I'm like, so is that when he's going to announce Starship True? Like, it's going to be the cyber ship. It's just going to be like a cube. It's just I can see the pain in your face. All right. I keep saying we're going to do this, and we keep having other interesting conversations. So let's do some viewer questions. Ross is asking, who do you think will be the next commercial launch provider that achieves regular launch cadence besides SpaceX and Rocket Lab?
Regular launch cadence. How are we going to define that?
Dealer's choice.
Yeah. Let's see. Relativity kind of surprised me because they've put a lot of time. Firefly surprised me because they put a lot of time, more time than I expected leading up to their next launch. Otherwise, I probably would have gone there. I also thought ABL, I thought they might be the ones to like hit it on the first try, and they did not. So that's like messed up my thinking a little bit. This is something I never thought I would have said. I wonder if Blue Origin launches next year.
He's gonna do it.
if we go from the premise that they've taken so freaking long to build all this stuff because they're like dialing it in and getting it right, could they kind of go once and then go again? Yeah, that's. I mean, they really are the outlier. It's such a mystery to me what they've spent 20 years doing.
Right. Well, just really quickly,
I think
do you agree with that premise? Because I think that's what they're trying to present, right? Is that they're spending all this time because they're going to launch and it's going to work flawlessly on the first time, and then they're just the steamroller's running, baby. But I don't know if that premise is real or not.
That premise is what everyone wants. Has never happened ever,
Right.
So, but like somebody must be able to figure this out one day. And if you've had 20 years to work on it and all the money in the world, maybe that's the one. I'm trying to think who else. I mean, Relativity's put a bunch of time. I mean, Relativity is like kind of like abandoned 3D printing now, and so that was
Another side quest.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess if I had to put money on it, I think I would bet on Blue Origin maybe.
Wow. You just made Adrian very happy.
I agree. I'm a known believer in that Blue Origin is actually building a huge production chain. And I think there's two possible realities here. It's either that nothing will happen for the next 10 years and we are constantly waiting for New Glenn to roll out, or it rolls out and then suddenly we are in a they have the potential to become a very big rocket company very quickly. Once they have infrastructure there, they have engine infrastructure, they have all these puzzle pieces, and if they come together at the right moment, I think they have the potential. I totally agree. I could see them becoming the next big rocket company that launches regularly.
It's just like looking at a coiled spring. You're like, it's coiled. It's a spring. We all know what the coiled
And
spring does. We have no idea when
man,
it'll do it.
they would have the demand too. I mean, people are like so afraid now that SpaceX is just so dominant, and there's lots of companies that don't want to pay for SpaceX launches because they're competitors and on some level. And yeah, I mean, they would have the business.
The best, the Cooper contract with the Cooper satellites, which was basically everything but SpaceX got a launch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good deal. All right, let's do another question. Schrodinger's cat is asking or saying, I'm a big fan of your first book about Elon Musk as it opened their eyes to the great things SpaceX are doing. Thank you so much for that. I tried to show it on screen, but I accidentally deleted it. But either way, not a question, but a statement, but a good statement because, yeah, thanks, Adrian. Because, yeah, we talked a lot about When the Heavens Went on Sale, but you also have your other book, and that one was from what, back in like 2015, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is like early days.
Yeah. I mean, it was fun. It's like hindsight again is kind of a funny thing. Kind of, it seems obvious now, but Elon was sort of a different dude back then, and the world for sure did not know about SpaceX as like a household name. And that was so fun. I mean, the SpaceX. I was not like a space nerd before I did that book. It was really SpaceX was my favorite part of the reporting, and especially like the early days of SpaceX. That was just so exciting to like hear all those stories. It's kind of what led me to do the next book, because I was like, oh, I can sort of see what it was like to build a rocket from scratch on some weird island. I really want to live through that. Yes, it was a fun experience.
It's I mean, please, I know you want time in between your space projects, but please continue. There's so many stories. There's so many interesting companies. There's so many interesting characters. I mean, I just continue for as long as you desire to pull this thread, because it's really been enjoyable having the insight that we've gotten from your work.
Oh man, it is a fun world.
So you weren't a space nerd before? I'm sorry if you were questions. I'm abandoning you again. You weren't a space nerd. What made you want to do an Elon Musk biography? Was it just because he was this big, character and was doing Tesla and SpaceX and all these interesting things, or like how'd you get the hook in the mouth?
Well, I've always been like the person, I never really I don't like to write about consumer technology much, so I always end up in like a factory or covering some engineering thing. And people forget, like I first started reporting on Elon in like 2012. So I wasn't even like a Tesla or a SpaceX beat reporter or anything like that. People forget, he'd kind of gone through this fallow period after PayPal where it was like, yeah, we know you're doing SpaceX, everything blows up, like nothing's working. Tesla, like we hear about the car, we can't buy them. That was like a decade, and he'd kind of fallen out of favor. People had done all these magazine stories on him, like here's this weird guy doing this weird stuff, and then I remember when I went to pitch the story to the magazine, they're like, we don't want to hear about this like Elon guy again. Everyone's done that. And I was like, no, things are different now. Like this Model S has just come off the factory floor. I was like, SpaceX actually got to the ISS. This is like, this stuff is like not a joke. This is incredibly hard. And so I was always, I'm a nerd, man. I love being in factories, and it was really the chance to go see like the Tesla factory and the SpaceX factory. That's like what drew me in. And then like the first time I went to the SpaceX factory, I mean, that was again, so this is coming from like not a space nerd, not an Elon fanboy. I hadn't even like met him. It was like a religious experience when I walked in that building, mostly as a person who likes to see stuff get built, because I had been told that we were like not able to make things in America anymore, and California would be like the last place you could build anything. And I
Right.
expected to walk into this like little factory with like 30 people working on this one rocket, and it was, it's like right in the middle of Los Angeles. It's right by the airport, and it was full of thousands of people. There were rocket bodies everywhere. You could like the energy in that room was just, I mean, you'd have to, anyone would just like feel that it was interesting and exciting. And so that was like the moment I'm like, oh, somebody should do a book on this guy, man. This stuff is really cool. And then Elon, he's kind of like a different dude back then. He was
Yeah,
he
you
was
said that.
way
Like, how has he changed? Like, what do you what vibes are you getting here?
in so many ways. I mean, geez, man. All right, this will take just a minute, but the Elon that I met back then was interesting to me because he was not some super polished CEO. He had no PR people around him. Whatever I asked him, he gave like a really thoughtful, like no BS answer to, and it was like really refreshing. I'm used to dealing with like CEOs who are just totally on the party line and trying to very restrictive. Like Elon was like an open book, and so that was interesting. He was much shyer, like self-confident in his intelligence, but like not self-confident in like interacting with the world and sort of like how he came off. When I was doing the book and we would have dinner once a month, and I write about it in the book. It's hard to explain. We would just walk into a restaurant in Palo Alto or Mountain View. He didn't have bodyguards or anything back then, and hardly anybody would notice. And Elon would just kind of walk in and sit down. Like he wasn't looking for attention. So over time, I think he's like grown into this sort of celebrity, larger than life
Meme lord.
character. He's actually, it's weird, on Twitter, he's such a troll and combative in person these days. Like we didn't talk to each other for a long time because he was kind of upset about some things in the book. Now we talk again. He like in person, I actually find him much easier to talk to these days. Like he's says he's on the spectrum. It was hard to like get conversation going sometimes in the past. Like these days, I find him much like easier just to have chit chat with. He kind of warms up pretty quick. He's not trolly or like really very controversial in person at all. He just seems to like save all that stuff for Twitter. So those are like some of the nuances how he's changed. Obviously, this like online persona he has on Twitter and some of the stuff he's into, like I never pictured Elon evolving into like, right wing conspiracy troll. Was not like on my bingo card back in the day.
No,
But
not mine
but I
either.
think, yeah, I sort of like, I think some of that stuff is real, and then honestly, like half the time, I think he's kind of like bored with life on some level, and this is just like a game to him, and he's just sort of messing
It
around with people
Back
for
yeah.
to side
sports.
questing.
Yeah, he's on the Rage Generation side quest. No, but I mean, I do feel like you're right. Like to some extent, it's just like something to do, like just a way to occupy some time that's not necessarily the most serious or super nailed down, but it's, I don't know, people like to argue on the internet, and whether you're a random person or a billionaire CEO, some people just like to argue on the internet for fun.
It is crazy
That's
to
the
watch.
internet.
We've never had like the world's richest person just hanging out like in the public sphere like this, just letting it all out
Right.
there. It's like people complain about it all the time, and I know he rubs. There's okay, maybe there's some serious consequences maybe to some of this. I'm a little skeptical on some of that, but certainly like bugs people. I don't know. I find this all very amusing and like and unusual, and it's fun. It's fun to watch on some level.
Indeed. Let's see here. We're gonna cram in some more questions. I think we told you we're going to 4:30 Eastern, So I do want to respect your time and I let you go on time. But if you feel like hanging out a little bit longer, we can keep doing
I'm
that too.
happy to chat.
Oh, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
I've
Adrian,
I
go.
have one question. Yeah, so comparing Starship now, and if you look at Boca Chica, does this give you the Falcon 9-like vibes from what you talked about with people? Because it seems a bit controversial sometimes, a bit weird to build a rocket just in an open field in South Texas. So is that giving you the same kind of feeling, or yeah?
Yeah, like yes, I mean it still has. I think it's weird for the public, but I mean it doesn't strike me. I like that SpaceX still it's grown so much. It's like tens and tens of thousands of employees now. They do a lot of government work and military work. Like my great fear was always it becomes like another military contractor, and we sort of like end. We have to start all over again and do this
Just
again.
bloat and bloat and bloat.
Yeah. And so like for 20 years and this many people to still kind of have that vibe is impressive. Like the things they do that are controversial, like blow a rocket up, and now we have this environmental questions. I mean, that is very much in keeping sort of with the Falcon 9 days of like, let's just especially Falcon 1 and even into 9, like let's see how far we can push things, and we want to move quick. I mean, some people might not like to hear this. This is sort of like what you have to do to make progress and keep this pace up to some degree. I think the people in Boca Chica are probably getting a lot more than they bargained for when they first set this up. I mean, it was a different, like Starship was it was on paper somewhere within SpaceX, but it wasn't even clear that they would like for sure build it there. When they were talking
I
about
think initially they said that they were going to be launching Falcon 1 and or Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy there.
Like
and then
it
they're
was
like,
meant
"Oh,
to be
by the
like
way."
it was meant to be, in my mind, like sort of Rocket Labs thing in the Mahia Peninsula. It's just like a little pad where some rockets were going off every now and then. I don't think they they bargained for the biggest rocket in history, just blasting away all the time. So I also think it's hilarious, like the people who. It's funny now that this has become like that there's retail investors in space, that the public watches these launches and like they see a rocket fly for the first time and blow up, and they're just like, oh, these guys don't know what they're doing. Elon Musk is like pushing things too fast. And it's just like, guys, this is just totally standard operating procedure, man. It would have been a miracle if this thing worked, So anyway, yeah, I find all that a bit amusing.
In a weird way, it would have gotten less headlines if it did the more impressive thing. Because if it would have succeeded in the first time, perfectly flawless, it would be like, yeah, SpaceX rocket works. But it would have been a complete insane achievement. And that would have gotten less attention.
I think you're 100% right on that. Yeah.
Yep. That's an unfortunate nature of. Oh, anyways, I'm not going to go down there. Anyways, let's see. Wesley the Third is saying they got both books, and that's reading material for the next few weeks. Good deal.
Well done.
Wesley the Third. Wesley the Third's also asking. They're really interested to hear what you think of Stoke Space.
I've not dug into them a bunch. People tell me really great stuff. I get like an unusual number of positive notes about them, but I would be lying if I pretended to give some sort of like informed perspective. That's like one of the few out of my wheelhouse. I apologize.
They seem like no. Please don't. They seem like a really, really interesting company, and I would absolutely love to know more about what they're up to. Let's see here. Not every hit has to be a home run. You can give an answer that's not. You're good, man. We're all just hanging out.
They came along after I was already well and truly committed to my band of married characters, and I got so sucked in there for a while. A couple of the newer ones, like ABL, same thing. I've been invited there, but don't know them as well.
Well, speaking of, we have a question from Malty asking, what about the failed companies, like Maston or Space or Kistler. Any thoughts or stories that you might have happened across? Because a lot of times when those companies go bust, employees then go on to these other companies, and it's like,
Yeah.
you hear stories.
Well, yeah, I mean, Maston is the one that really sticks out. Armadillo is a little older now. It's kind of like that previous generation. I write about Maston in the new book a little bit. I could write more for sure. They were so fascinating, it was like
Right.
a lot of times when I went to one of these rocket startups, the most capable, knowledgeable people I ran into, inevitably they had like interned at Maston. And I think it was like this, it was small enough where you had to be a generalist. So you ended up with a lot of people who had to work on like software, avionics, the engine, structures, everything. And so when they would get to a company like Astra, had this intimate knowledge of how the whole system works together. Mastic could never sort of like get out of its own way to make itself into a real business beyond kind of like government contracts here and there. And Dave Maston, bless him, I don't think he's like the best businessman, and they tried this a few times. But yeah, Maston I think is like you know in this world of the wild west of space, I mean, they sort of have a religious level kind of reputation as a special place.
Anytime I'm out in Mojave, I'm always just like, man, I wish I was here when they were doing the little hop tests and everything. Because just what a cool company. And I mean, they were one of the, if not the first, to do the propulsive landing of a rocket vertically. And I don't know if it's apocryphal or if it's actually true or what, but that basically, Elon saw what they were doing out in the desert and was like, yo, why aren't we doing this? This is the way.
It's true. I've seen the email. This is true.
That's awesome.
I have a copy of it somewhere. Yeah, and Zombie was like, it was like 5 people or 4 people,
Yep. Yeah, and it's just, I feel like Mojave has some kind of weird curse or something going on, like between Virgin Orbit and Maston, and I think like X-Core and Armadillo. Like there's a bunch of different random companies that have come and gone over the years that all appeared to have been doing something really novel and cool, and we all wanted to see work. And it's just like, man, Mojave, what's the deal there?
And it's oh man, I love going there. Every time I go there, same thing. I'm always like, I should just write a book about Mojave. It's such a like magical, dysfunctional, like I love that place. And then, but to your point, it seemed to work for like planes and less for new space, the next level,
Yeah.
So
I mean, Stratolaunch seems to be doing pretty well.
But Virgin Orbit then is like the outliner because like it's still plane involved, but it didn't work. So
right,
like, where's the plane scale that didn't work?
Yeah, it's a fine plane line. Oh man, let's see here. We did that one. Let's do this one. I'm gonna butcher his name again, but you say Atom? Is that who we mentioned earlier? Artyom is asking for me to please ask Ashlee to elaborate on Firefly and CFIUS. Cephas?
Oh, Cepheus. Yeah. I could do that. Well, so for people who don't know, I mean,
I don't even know what that is.
I'll do a little backstory just on Firefly and Max, just so for people who don't follow all this stuff. But so Max came from Ukraine. His parents worked on the Soviet space program. He made a bunch of money through software in the tech industry, and he bought Firefly when it was bankrupt. Firefly had initially been more or less like a American-based competitor to Rocket Lab, like a carbon fiber, pretty small rocket. Went out of business. Max Polyakov buys it for a few $1 million, and then he pumps like $250 million into the company over a number of years.
So much money.
The rocket scales up inside. I mean, they have an incredible facility in Texas, both like testing and manufacturing. So I was like following Max on this whole journey. he had this vision, which I found fascinating. I thought it was like unlikely to happen, but it was amazing. Like he wanted, Ukraine was a huge part of the Soviet space program, like huge, massive, all this knowledge, know-how, and and was running on fumes. And he wanted to take like the best of the old Soviet space know-how and like infuse that into like this new space American company. They had gone through, like, when I first heard this proposal, I'm like, this will never happen. And they actually managed to push through these deals where like Ukrainian technology could flow to the United States, and stuff like turbopumps, which are incredibly hard to make still. And then, I mean, crazy things started to happen, which I outline in the book, and they're public, so I don't mind going through some of this. But Firefly got really far. They stood their rocket up in Vandenberg. We're getting ready to launch. The U.S. government started to raise accusations that were like quite flimsy, that because Max is Ukrainian, he could one day perhaps become a Russian, asset.
Right.
And then, like, in these, so CFIUS is like the part of the government that can like nix a foreign acquisition. They can sort of push, shady foreign people out from doing business in the US if they want to. And so Max, as the closer Firefly got to launching the rocket, the more the US government started to suggest this guy was a nefarious character. The documents were kind of crazy. It was like, you were born in Ukraine. Ukraine is near Russia. Russia has spy satellites. Therefore, like, you may have a spy satellite. Also, there's a bunch of top secret stuff that we won't tell you about that's also shady. Promise, And so they forced Max out of the company. This dude put $250 million into this company, and the U.S. government like took it away from him in the span of like a couple weeks. And just crazy. And this was like before the Ukraine war. Like, in hindsight, this looks like the most idiotic thing you could have possibly done, because
It really
the U.S.
does.
government, the U.S. government could have taken like all these Ukrainian rocket engineers out of the country. We'd have all this stuff, and instead it's just getting like bombed by the Russians. So, and the engineers are probably, who knows where they are, man. I mean, who knows? They could be doing stuff North Korea, wherever. Anyway, big mistake.
It's such a mind-boggling thing to have happen, because it's not like we've never, repatriated citizens of another country with scientific skills to help us with rocket programs. I mean, kind of have
Like,
done that many times. Like, you would think that there's a synergy there where you can help these people out, and it's just, ugh.
It would be I mean, not, Yuri Milner is like not a dude that I have anything against. I actually cover a lot of companies he funds, but this is like a Russian dude who's funded most of the major tech companies over the last 15 years. I guess that's okay. Like, and he can invest in SpaceX and other things. That's okay. But like, Ukraine is an ally, but this Ukrainian guy can't have a rocket company. Like, that part, I just get confused about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those, just makes my brain hurt. I want to respect your time. We're 8 minutes over. Let's do like one or two more and call it. So innovation, that's like the buzzword, right? But like, to innovate in space, I mean, it's such a hard thing to do. Like, after seeing everything that you've seen, do you have any opinion on like, what does it take to actually like push the bar forward, raise the bar? How how can we do this,
Yeah.
or how can somebody do that?
Again, I don't know if this is a super satisfying answer, but like on the rocket stuff, things get a little tricky because, we've known the physics behind rockets for a really long time, and you can like fiddle with new materials and different scale and things like that. There's only a few knobs you can sort of turn. I mean, SpaceX at least sort of put this Silicon Valley mindset behind the software and how you go about you're developing your team and some of the materials and the electronics. I mean, like I think we are on the cusp of an explosion of innovation because like Moore's law has. So sorry, we're going to leap from the rockets to the satellites and the machines. Like Moore's law has not been in space in a really meaningful way, sort of like ever until the last couple of years. You know, when you had to use like space grade radios and you design satellites to sit up there for like 20 years. I mean, you're just sending up this object that is decaying year by
Yep.
year. And it's just like the whole, we've turned Moore's law so many times over the last 50 years, and we were not getting kind of any of these gains. So now we finally are, you know, and people are going to be experimenting with all kinds of new satellites. I think stuff like Varda, it may seem small, but it's like a perfect example of kind of like new things that are possible now, that we can put real computing into orbit. And I think, I mean, I argue this in the book. I just think it's like so clear to me. We are building a computing shell around the planet, and this is the next natural evolution of our technological infrastructure. Like it's totally akin to me to building out the internet in the first place. And I think
Yep.
we grossly underestimate what happens if you have always on high speed internet blanketing the earth every corner. Like I don't think we've even like begun to think of all the different applications that come from this new fabric, and pretty much like similar thing for all the imagery. So anyway, I think this innovation is afoot, but I think it's mostly happens like up in space, and maybe some of the rocket stuff is a little less thrilling.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Although
I'm still mind
space
blown that
catapult,
SpaceX,
space catapult.
space railgun, space all the projectile things.
It's like
Oh man,
it's like very complicated answer. Arrow down. Space catapult.
space catapult. I love it. Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing to me still that SpaceX is able to just crank out Starlink satellites like nobody's business. And you know, they've got thousands on orbit. They're going to need thousands more. And it's like we went from this world where it's like one bespoke $2 billion, you know, satellite
6
to do the
years.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh yeah, got a couple thousand in orbit. It's been a couple years, with, you know, no big deal. Like it's just, I mean, it's not the same exact thing as Moore's law. 'Cause it's not transistors and all that, but it's in a way it fits in my brain in sort of the same place to where we are taking advantage of that to be able to make these things.
Like when we were talking about like the Henry Ford of rockets, is like the satellites had to happen too. That did not happen. This is not normal. You know, you usually spent 6 years, 8 years to make one satellite, and now we have actual satellite factories. I mean, Planet Labs, you know, even at their little factory can pump out as many as they need in a couple weeks for a new launch. These things did not exist before.
Good deal. Oh man, just like reading the book, I'm sad. I want more. You're welcome back on NSF Live anytime you want.
Thank you guys.
If you have anything you want to plug besides the 2 books, you said you had the show, A Hello World. Just
I'll
plug
do it
away,
super
my
quick.
friend.
Just because it's coming out. First of all, this is a huge pleasure and honor. Thank you guys so much for having me. Yeah, so I make a technology travel show called Hello World. It goes on Bloomberg and YouTube, and I think on September 7th, our whole new season kicks off. A new episode every week. We go to like Kyrgyzstan, Nigeria. We go to Colorado. Got some space stuff out there, and yeah. Just anyway, that's all I got. Thank you for thanks for having me and all the questions.
Yeah, this has been so wonderful, and I see the chat and YouTube. Everyone is super stoked. So seriously, just once again, from all of us here at NSF, thank you so much. Final question. It's not going to be anything crazy. I'm not that devious. Do you have a favorite rocket? What's your favorite rocket?
Ooh, no one's ever asked me this.
What? I mean, come on. We
What?
have at NSF. We are nothing but not tribalist about what we like. If you like the worm, you're good. If you like the meatball, you're bad. At least so say I. I do not speak for NSF. But no, it's fun. You know, it's fun to sort of have like a sports team or be a little bit jokingly, casually tribalist.
Some
about
even
these
have
things.
the and some have the very wrong sports team. There's very bad opinions in the NSF team. I want to point out. People
You
who
know,
like Aries can be mentioned.
I'm keeping my mouth closed. I'm keeping my mouth closed. So yeah, favorite rocket.
I'm trying to think if I'm going to go predictable or unpredictable on this. The rocket that I have the most emotional attachment to, without question, is not, the most successful rocket. It's Astra, and it's probably Astra Rocket 1 or Rocket 2. I spent, once you've lived with a rocket, it like occupies a different place in your heart,
Yeah.
And so it also, their rockets also do like both good and very weird things. Like I feel like it's the most unconventional of sort of rockets. Once you've seen a rocket dance through a fence, that's also quite cool,
Yep. Kind of legendary, honestly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, much like
going.
the rocket sliding through the fence, I think we will slide on out of the YouTube fence here and call it a
Well
day.
done.
We're putting the links into the chat for the books. So if y'all want to grab the books, if you haven't already, I don't know what you're doing as a space nerd if you haven't grabbed these already, but do it. And seriously, Ashlee, man, thank you so much. Once again, this has been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. That's it for this week, and we will be back next week with another awesome episode of NSF Live. But until then, stay nerdy.
And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
RS-68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, Atlantic.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal. Flight down to FD off. Bring in FD off. It's orange!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
This methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?